3 months ago, I learned about my Uncle Frank's passing. We weren't particularly close, but to my surprise, he left me one of his houses in his will. It felt odd, like a puzzle piece I couldn't quite fit. Sure, it was a nice gesture, but I didn't need a house. As a new father of twin daughters, Sarah and Emily, the last thing I needed was another responsibility added to my plate. To get it off my hands quickly, I decided to pack up and temporarily move across the country to manage the sale. My work, thankfully, just requires a laptop and phone, so I convinced my boss to approve remote work for a while. My wife, Emily, couldn't take time off from her job, which meant I was going to do this solo. At first, I treated it like an impromptu vacation, a necessary evil with a touch of silver lining. I thought I'd be there for a week, tops, but it turned out that selling a house is more complicated than I'd expected. The realtor I hired was doing most of the heavy lifting, but after a month, I was still stuck there. That's when the house began playing tricks on me. At first, it was little things. My keys weren't where I left them. A mug I set down on the counter ended up on the table. I'd catch fleeting shadows in my peripheral vision or realize hours had gone by when I swore it had only been minutes. I told myself it was just stress or maybe the loneliness. Except for the realtor's occasional visits with buyers, the place felt eerily silent, too quiet for someone like me who was used to the chaos of crying babies and a bustling household. One afternoon, the monotony was broken by a knock at the door. A neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Watson, stood there with a golden retriever by her side. She explained, somewhat cryptically, that she'd been dog-sitting for my uncle while he was in the hospital and thought I should take Buster now that the house was mine. I hesitated. There was something off about Mrs. Watson, especially her timeline. She acted like Uncle Frank had just passed last week. But I brushed it off. Maybe she was just forgetful or grieving in her own way. Either way, Buster was irresistible. His warm brown eyes and wagging tail melted my reservations instantly. I figured he'd be the perfect surprise for my daughters when I finally got home, if my wife would let me keep him, that is. But even Buster seemed to sense that something wasn't right about the house. He adapted quickly to his new home, but wouldn't go upstairs. No amount of coaxing or treats could get him to step foot beyond the first-floor staircase. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was almost convenient, easier to keep track of him. Until the day he vanished. Vanished. 1 second, Buster was sitting by my feet, wagging his tail as I opened the treat jar. The next second, he was gone. My eyes darted around and I called his name, my voice echoing through the house. Nothing. I searched everywhere. The layout of the house was straightforward enough, and I should have found him in minutes. The kitchen connected to the living room, and on the other side of that was the master bedroom and a small study. The dining room was off the kitchen, leading to the entrance hall, which looped back to the living room and the stairs. I bolted upstairs, calling his name. The second floor was divided by a balcony that overlooked the living room and the front entrance. To the left were a guest room and an old game room filled with dusty shelves and an ancient arcade machine. Going right led to 2 more guest rooms and a bathroom at the end of the hall. I checked every room, calling for Buster, my voice breaking the oppressive silence. After combing through the upstairs and finding nothing, I had to face the impossible. Buster had somehow gotten outside. It didn't make sense. Every door and window was locked, and there was no doggy door. But I couldn't deny the evidence, or lack thereof, inside the house. So I ventured out, searching the neighborhood for nearly an hour. Panic clawed at my chest as I thought about making flyers to put up. When exhausted, I returned to the house. The moment I opened the front door, I heard the frantic click-clack of Buster's paws scrambling toward me from the kitchen. Relief washed over me like a wave. "Buster!" I shouted, dropping to my knees as he bounded into my arms. He licked my face furiously, his tail wagging like crazy. I was ecstatic, but also bewildered. How had I missed him? That night, I let him sleep in the bed with me. It felt comforting to have him close, even if it broke my usual rules. Looking back, it was a mistake. But at the time, it felt like a little piece of sanity in a house that seemed bent on eroding it. Work picked up the next day, and soon, the strange events in the house were drowned out by the noise of deadlines, phone calls, and contracts. My clients demanded constant attention, and I delivered, landing several massive deals in quick succession. I was working so hard that I knew a promotion was inevitable when I returned to the main office. But there was a price. I lost track of time more often than I cared to admit. The sun would set without me realizing it, the house plunging into darkness while I was glued to my laptop. Buster's whines for food or bathroom breaks would fade into the background until I'd snap out of it and feel a pang of guilt. I started setting alarms to keep track of time, but even those sometimes failed to cut through my focus. I was on top of the world professionally, but my health was crumbling. Meals became afterthoughts. Sleep was an inconvenience. My body felt hollow, but the rush of success kept me moving. At least Buster got fed on time, better care than I was giving myself. Then it all came crashing down with a bang. Literally. I was halfway through finishing another spreadsheet when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a door slamming upstairs. Buster, who had been whining behind me, froze for a moment before bolting up the stairs. My stomach churned. I almost called the police right then, phone trembling in my hand. But doubt crept in, whispering that I must have imagined it. Maybe I hadn't closed a door all the way earlier. And besides, if there was an intruder, surely Buster would be barking his head off. I swallowed my fear and grabbed the nearest weapon I could find, a frying pan. Slowly I crept upstairs, my heart hammering in my chest. The upstairs hallway was dim, lit only by the moonlight streaming through the downstairs windows. Buster stood stock still in front of the bathroom door. I knew I'd left that door closed earlier. It was now wide open. "Buster?" I whispered, but he didn't move. His tail was rigid, his whole body locked like a statue. I tried the hallway light. Nothing. Sweat prickled my skin as I tightened my grip on the frying pan and stepped closer to the bathroom. Pure darkness greeted me. The bathroom had no windows, and whatever waited inside was shrouded in shadows. I hesitated at the threshold, paralyzed by fear, but Buster's silence emboldened me. He wasn't barking, which I told myself had to mean there wasn't a threat. I stepped inside. The room was small. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. My eyes had adjusted enough to confirm that it was empty. Relief started to creep in, loosening the knots in my chest. Then I stepped into something wet, sticky. My breath hitched. Slowly, my hand went to my pocket, pulling out my cell phone. I tapped the screen to cast light on the floor. The beam illuminated the floor, and my blood turned to ice. Bright red liquid surrounded my feet, glistening in the faint glow. My phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the ground. I fled downstairs, my heart pounding in my ears, and Buster followed close behind, his claws clicking against the hardwood floor. This time, there was no hesitation as I grabbed the landline and dialed the police. Fortunately, a patrol car was already nearby, and within minutes, 2 officers arrived. Their powerful flashlights lit up the darkness upstairs as they carefully inspected the area. It didn't take long for them to call down to me, claiming the upstairs lights were working just fine. The puddle I'd seen, they said it was rusty water, likely from an old burst pipe. I felt a mix of relief and embarrassment as I followed them back upstairs. Sure enough, the once vivid red puddle now looked like muddy brown sludge. The officers laughed it off, but were kind enough to recommend a good plumber. My cell phone, ruined from its unplanned plunge into the rusty water, would have to be replaced. In the meantime, I was stuck with the old rotary landline in the kitchen. After seeing the officers out, I promised myself I'd call a plumber first thing in the morning. Yet, despite being drained, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. The adrenaline from the night's events kept me wired, so I turned my attention back to work, drafting more documents for the company. At some point, Buster made another mess in the living room. I was so exhausted I snapped at him, saying things I instantly regretted. Worse than the words, though, was my frustration, and anger I knew he didn't deserve. That morning, guilt weighed heavy on me. I spoke to my supervisor and explained that the stress was getting to me. To my surprise, they approved a week off, calling it a mental health vacation. Just like that, all my pending work was reassigned, leaving me with nothing but time. Determined to make it up to Buster, I spent the day spoiling him with treats and playing games. We ran around the yard, his joyful barks filling the air and lifting my spirits. But the peace didn't last. I found the first message later that evening. Since I hadn't yet called the plumber, I decided to check the upstairs bathroom to see if the leak had worsened. As I climbed the stairs, my gaze was immediately drawn to the wall in the hallway. There it was, a message scrawled in red paint. "Losing your mind?" For a split second, I thought I was. The terror that gripped me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. My mind raced with the only logical explanation. Someone had snuck into the house, probably while I was asleep. What followed was a blur of panic and frantic movement. I don't want to repeat everything I said or did. It's too humiliating to admit just how unhinged I felt. But eventually, I barricaded myself in my bedroom, with Buster standing guard, and called the police again. The same officers arrived, their expressions now tinged with concern. Together, we searched every inch of the house. Nothing. Every door and window was locked tight. There was no sign of forced entry. To my surprise, they took me seriously. One of them mentioned that there had been a string of bizarre incidents in the neighborhood, break-ins where nothing was stolen. They offered to have a patrol car sit outside overnight. Grateful, I accepted. Still, I knew I wouldn't sleep in the house. I called the only person I knew in the area, my old college roommate, Mike. By sheer luck, he lived just 30 minutes away. Mike didn't hesitate. He offered to pick me and Buster up, promising to arrive in a few hours. I busied myself with packing everything I'd brought with me, unable to shake the feeling that I'd never set foot in this house again. When Mike called to say he'd arrived, I grabbed Buster's leash and hurried out to meet him. But the driveway was empty. No car. No Mike. Confused, I called him back. He insisted he was at the address I'd given him. I could hear the frustration in his voice as he described walking up to the front door. He knocked, and I heard an elderly woman answer. "She says she's never heard of you or your uncle," Mike told me. "She was nice about it, though, apologized and everything." I felt a chill run down my spine. He rattled off the address he'd gone to, and it was correct. My address. Panicking, I told him to wait while I checked the curb and mailbox for the house number. But there were no numbers. Instead, scrawled in red paint on the curb were the words, "Losing your mind." I dropped my phone. The temptation to leave immediately was overwhelming. I could have started walking and never looked back, but I couldn't leave without Buster, and I needed my belongings too. Summoning every shred of courage, I re-entered the house one last time. When I got back to the room, my heart dropped. My suitcase, which I had spent over an hour meticulously packing, was empty. Every single item was back in its original place, as if I had never touched it. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. But I forced myself to focus on my priority, getting out. I clipped the leash onto Buster's collar and gasped when I got a good look at him. His fur was dull, his movements slow. He looked exhausted and frail, like he'd aged years in just a few days. "I'll make this up to you, buddy," I whispered. "We're almost out of here." I moved toward the front door, trying to appear calm, as if nothing was wrong. But when I turned the knob, the deadbolt refused to budge. The knob spun freely in my hand, mocking me. My stomach twisted with fear, but Buster's steady presence beside me gave me the courage to keep trying. I knelt down, hugging him tightly. His tongue swiped my face, an affectionate gesture that sparked an idea. This wasn't a maniac or a physical force keeping me here. This was something else entirely. I straightened up and walked toward the backyard, calling out cheerfully, "Well, Buster, time for a little walk." To my surprise, the sliding glass door opened without resistance. Buster bounded outside, his energy returning as he raced around the yard. I followed him, stepping into the night air and taking my first real breath in what felt like hours. The backyard was enclosed by a wrought iron fence, its bars spaced just wide enough for Buster to slip through. But my eyes landed on something else. A tree that had grown too close to the fence, its thick branches extending beyond it. The gate was almost certainly locked, so this was my way out. "Go ahead, Buster," I said softly, and he didn't need any encouragement. In a flash, he was on the other side, waiting for me. The climb was agonizing. My arms burned, and I became painfully aware of how weak I had become. By the time I reached the top, I was gasping for air. I swung my leg over and started climbing down, grateful to see Buster waiting patiently below. But then his ears perked up. A low growl rumbled in his throat before he bolted toward a nearby hill. "Buster!" I shouted, scrambling down and giving chase. He disappeared over the crest, and I hurried to follow, my legs trembling with each step up the steep incline. Stone bricks had been laid into the side of the hill, forming a rough staircase, but the climb was still grueling. I focused on my footing, head down until my hand reached out to steady myself and landed on carpet. I froze, confusion flooding my mind. Slowly, I looked up. I wasn't outside anymore. Ahead of me was the second-floor landing of the house. Behind me, the staircase stretched down to the entrance hall and living room. I was back. Buster was gone. Exhausted and defeated, I crawled up the final steps and collapsed onto the landing. For a long time, I just sat there, calling for Buster, my voice echoing into the silence. Then the phone rang. The sound jolted me upright. Whatever was tormenting me, it couldn't stop the outside world. The ringing was a lifeline. I stumbled down the stairs, nearly falling, and grabbed the kitchen phone. Hello? My wife's voice filled my ears, warm and comforting. Honey, are you okay? I haven't heard from you in days. I was starting to get worried. Days? That couldn't be right. What do you mean? I stammer. I've been working non-stop. Did my supervisor tell you I took the week off? Week off? What are you talking about? She asked, her voice tinged with concern. You were supposed to keep working as soon as you got there. I felt a sinking in my stomach. Wait, how long have I been here? Almost 9 days now, she said softly. 9 days? It couldn't be. Listen to me, I said, my voice trembling. You need to call the police, tell them something's wrong. I think I'm having a medical emergency. It wasn't even a lie. Maybe this was all in my head. A gas leak, a brain tumor. Either option was better than believing I was trapped in a haunted house. Baby, what's wrong? She asked. You're not making any sense. I'm fine, I lied. Just call the police, give them my uncle's name and this address, please. Tell them an ambulance might be needed. Her reply was mocking, a cruel mimicry of her usual playfulness. Pretty please, with a cherry on top. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, my heart pounding as my wife's voice continued to echo through the receiver. Only it wasn't her, not really. Her tone had morphed into something mocking and cruel, laced with malice I had never known from her before. Does your tummy hurt? When's the last time you ate? The voice cooed, its words dripping with venom. Then came the most horrifying part. I wonder what Buster tastes like. My blood ran cold. In a fit of panic, I slammed the phone down, but the damage was done. My stomach churned, and I realized with growing dread that it had been a long time since I'd eaten. The pain clawed at me, sharp and unrelenting. And then I heard it, Buster whining from upstairs. Ignoring the agony in my legs from the bruises and soreness, I forced myself up the stairs. Each step was a monumental effort, but I couldn't leave Buster like this. When I reached the top, my breath caught in my throat. Buster lay in front of the bathroom, sprawled on his side, looking frailer than I'd ever seen him. His ribs were visible beneath his fur, and his eyes were dull and glassy. The hallway was a nightmare. Losing your mind was scrawled everywhere now, in thick, dripping letters on the walls, ceiling, and even the floor. There was no denying it anymore. The writing was blood, fresh and oozing. I crouched to lift Buster, his limp body heavier than I expected, when the banging began at the front door. My heart leaped into my throat. Police, open up. The voice was familiar. One of the officers from before. I was sure of it. Up here, I called out, struggling to hold Buster's weight as I stumbled toward the stairs. But the hallway stretched endlessly before me, impossibly long, like some cruel trick of the house. Each step seemed to take me further from the stairs. Then I heard another voice. My wife's voice. I'm sorry, she said sweetly. My husband wasn't feeling well. He's resting in the bedroom. Can I help you? No. I screamed, my voice cracking. I'm here upstairs. But my cries were drowned out as the officer replied, I'd like to check on him all the same. Sure, the imitation of my wife said. Come in, he's right through here. I pushed forward with everything I had, dragging Buster's lifeless body as the hallway twisted and warped. And then, a scream. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard, a man's blood-curdling cry, filled with terror and agony. Suddenly, the hallway snapped back to normal. I found myself at the top of the stairs, teetering on the edge. I lost my balance and fell, tumbling down the steps. When I hit the bottom, I landed on Buster. His pain howl pierced the air, and I rolled off him, frantically checking to see if he was okay. He was alive, but barely. The trail of blood caught my eye. Thick and dark, it led around the corner and under the door to my bedroom. A shadow moved beneath the door, large and foreboding. Summoning every ounce of courage, I limped to the kitchen and grabbed the heaviest weapon I could find, a frying pan. With it gripped tightly in my hand, I returned to the bedroom, each step heavier than the last. The shadow shifted again, and I froze outside the door. The thought of whatever was inside, something capable of killing a man, nearly paralyzed me, but I raised the pan and turned the handle. Before I could open the door fully, it flew open on its own. A figure stood there, turning to face me. I swung with all my might. The officer's face stared back at me, his mouth frozen in a twisted smile. We both looked down. A knife jutted from his chest, my hand still wrapped around the handle. I staggered backward as he collapsed, lifeless, to the floor. I looked at my hands. The frying pan was gone, replaced by the knife. I couldn't understand it. I'd felt the weight of the pan in my grip, but now all I remembered was pulling the knife from the kitchen drawer. I dropped the blade and scrambled back toward Buster. His body was still. His fur was warm to the touch, but his chest didn't rise. He was gone. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at the lifeless forms of Buster and the officer. Time lost all meaning. Eventually, I crawled to the couch in the living room and collapsed onto it. The sun set. Darkness crept in, but I stayed where I was, unmoving, unwilling to disturb whatever fragile calm had settled over the house. But I couldn't ignore the bodies forever. My stomach growled, the hunger gnawing at me. I forced myself to move, finding a shovel in the outdoor closet. Digging Buster's grave was agonizing. I whispered apologies as I laid him to rest, his body too light in my arms. I couldn't bring myself to bury the officer yet. I told myself I'd come back after eating. Back in the kitchen, I rummaged through the pantry, my hands trembling. I grabbed a box of cereal and was about to take a bite when a thought stopped me cold. What if it wasn't cereal? What if I was eating poison, or worse? My mind conjured images of worms writhing in my mouth, and I threw the box to the ground, the hunger forgotten. I had to get out of this house. And then, as if mocking my resolve, I found myself standing in front of the front door. It was wide open. The front door gaped before me, an invitation and a warning rolled into one. For a moment I froze, my outstretched hand hovering just a foot short of the threshold. My instincts screamed that this was another trick, a trap laid out by the house to mock my desperation. I imagined the door slamming shut the moment I stepped through, maybe crushing my fingers or something worse. But the breeze filtering in from outside felt so real, so refreshing. It was freedom, so close I could almost taste it. My breath hitched. Every logical thought told me to stay where I was, but the primal urge to escape overpowered my fear. My feet moved of their own accord, slow and hesitant. Stepping over the threshold felt like passing through an invisible barrier. The oppressive weight that had clung to me inside the house lifted, and I found myself outside. The police cruiser sat in the driveway, its doors unlocked, keys dangling in the ignition. I stood there, staring, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. Maybe the officer had been a murderer, caught in his own web of karma. Maybe his death had appeased whatever haunted the house. The explanation didn't matter. I shoved my doubts down and climbed into the car. The engine roared to life with a twist of the key, and I drove. The neighborhood melted away behind me, replaced by unfamiliar streets and glaring sunlight. The open road felt surreal, so vast and empty after the suffocating confines of the house. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was free. I kept driving, turning aimlessly. Left, then right, then left again. I had no destination, no plan, just the need to keep moving. But the longer I drove, the stranger it all became. The roads were empty. No other cars, no pedestrians, not even the faint sound of life beyond the hum of the engine. The city seemed deserted, a ghost town stretching endlessly before me. Where was everyone? The unease grew in my stomach, spreading like ice through my veins. And then I felt that sinking feeling again, pulling me back. I gripped the wheel tighter, desperate to hold on to reality. But it was no use. My vision blurred, and the car around me faded. When my surroundings solidified, I wasn't in the car anymore. I was in an armchair, back in the living room. My arms hung limply, still raised as if gripping an invisible steering wheel. The absurdity of it hit me all at once, and I screamed, my voice cracking with frustration and despair. I shot to my feet, the room spinning around me. My gaze landed on the dining table, where my work laptop sat open, its screen glowing eerily in the dim light. I approached cautiously, my breath hitching when I saw the words already typed onto the screen. Lost your mind, good. Now you won't mind losing the rest. My hand felt heavy, and I looked down to find a knife in my grip. My stomach churned as I dropped it with a clatter, backing away as if the blade might leap up and strike me. The words on the screen blurred as tears welled in my eyes. I wiped them away and started typing, desperate to reclaim some sense of control. But my fingers felt clumsy, every keystroke wrong. A new message formed, one I hadn't written. I'm sorry, I've disappointed you all for the last time, goodbye. I screamed again, my voice hoarse and raw. And then I wasn't in the dining room anymore. I was in the study, hunched over the desk, my hands trembling above the keyboard. The compulsion to write overwhelmed me, and I obeyed. I typed emails pleading for help, sent frantic messages to the local police department's Facebook page, and scrawled my thoughts onto digital paper. But the house didn't let me rest. Every time I paused, I found myself in a new room, faced with new horrors. Once, I opened the study door and saw a hellscape stretching before me, molten lava bubbling and hissing just inches away. I slammed the door shut, refusing to step into that nightmare. I tried to piece together my life, to make sense of who I was and how I had ended up here. But the more I thought about it, the more fragmented my memories became. I couldn't recall my uncle's name or face. Had he ever existed? Had I ever had an uncle? The realtor who sold me this house, were they a man or a woman? I didn't know. And my family, my wife, my daughters, had they ever been real? Their names, their faces, their voices slipped further from my grasp with each passing moment. I tried to remember my childhood, my parents, but all that came back was the house. It loomed over every memory, an unshakable presence in my mind. Now, I sit here, typing these words in the study. The hunger gnaws at me, the voices grow louder, and I can feel the house closing in around me. I'm so tired. My thoughts are scattered, my hands heavy, and the screen blurs before my eyes. A B C D F G H I J K L M N O P Q R S T U V W X Y Z. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dogs. What's my name? I don't know. I'll die if I stop writing. I'll die if I stop working. The quick brown fox skumped over lazy dogs. Dogs. Buster. I miss Buster. I wish I could pet him one last time. But was he ever real? Is anything? I'm so tired. So hungry. I need to focus. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy goodbye. The quick brown I'm sorry jumped over pointed you lazy dog goodbye. I'm quick I've jumped a sap feel last time lazy dogs. I'm sorry. Jumped over disappointed you lazy. For the lazy dogs, goodbye. I'm sorry. I've disappointed you all. For the last time, goodbye.